This is Pick Up the Mic podcast on WWMVLP 95.5 and Radio 22. This is Pick Up the Mic podcast. I'll be your host, Corey Whitmore. This podcast aims to bring new voices into the conversation about how to eliminate racial disparities in education in the Madison Metropolitan School District. Over the past couple of months, we've had numerous interviews with African-American high school juniors and seniors, principals, teachers, mental health therapists, to give us more perspective on how we start this conversation and how we find potential solutions. Here in episode 5, we are talking about Black teachers. Why are they so important? The interviews with the students and the interviews we have with the community leaders, I believe they will answer that question directly. But not only do that, they will also talk to the impact and the effect Black teachers can have, not only on Black students, but on white students as well. Schools, districts should be embracing a diverse coalition of teachers, administrators, counselors across the board, because everybody benefits from that diversity. And that is something that I think everyone needs to understand. Normally, I would love to start out each episode with an experience, with a personal experience or quote or something or an article that I've found, but there's a whole lot to unpack here. So I don't really want to eat up a lot of that time talking. I really want you to hear from our students and our community leaders, because they paint a holistic picture of what is going on and why districts, schools need to embrace a diverse environment. So let's get started with our students. And the question that I posed to our students in our interviews was, why is it important to have a teacher that looks like you? And here's what they had to say.
I do think it's important to have a teacher that looks like you. Like throughout my whole education, my U.S. education, I've only had one teacher of color, and that was my avid teacher freshman year. He's been like the same teacher for all 3 years now. And it's just like, I think I have like the closest relationship with them. It's been like since like freshman year, it was just like easier to relate to him, and just he like understood me, and he was like also African too, so he like understood my background and like everything, that he just like resonated very well with me, and that just made the learning connection and everything feel better. Yeah, he's always like checks in on his students, and it's just like when he talks to me about stuff, he's just like he understands me more so than like his advice means more.
So kind of the things that he tells you holds a little bit more weight because of who he is and what his background is.
Yeah.
I think I had my first Black teacher this year at MDCC, not even at Hotel. Right. So it's kind of like you have a different connection and a different motivation to not only do the work, but I don't know, it's just different. Like you're like, I connect with this person. I know this person cares. They kind of understand me. And if I fall down, I feel like they're going to help me back up. Whereas I don't really feel like, not a lot of my teachers wouldn't do that, but it's harder to ask for that when you don't have that connection.
I feel like in schools, we feel most of the time like left out and like alone. I feel like there isn't enough like people of color. There isn't enough diversity, and there isn't enough there isn't enough people like us that's like fighting for or like advocating for what we need. So I feel like a teacher of color kind of like starts that up, because they're in the system and they can help us more. So if there's more of them, I think they can help us more. And then, like, on top of that, like, it just, like, as a person of color, I'd be more willing to go to someone who looks like someone from my community and someone that I would see around my neighborhood, and just like someone that's like similar to me. I'd be more willing to go to them for help and advice and anything, compared to like compared to just regular teachers or regular white teachers and stuff. And like on top of that, like, it's not just like any student, it's just not just like any teacher, not like a gym teacher, like the stereotype English teacher or something, but like people also in like higher advanced classes like science and APs and others.
Because they're most likely, if you live in the same city as that teacher, they're most likely to have the same backgrounds or grow up in the same atmosphere you. They might even know somebody out of your family. Like, that's one thing I see a lot is like, oh, I went to school with your mom when we was younger or something like that. Like having connections to the community you come from. Like most of the kids that go to our school, we live in like we live in like middle class, low income neighborhoods. I'm pretty sure the teachers, they have like, they don't get paid a lot, but they don't live in the same neighborhoods as us. They're not coming from the same backgrounds. So if we had teachers that were local, who've been here their whole life, who has some diversity to them, then maybe you can maybe make a change. But till then, I don't see anything happening.
Why do you feel that, in your opinion, why do you feel that there just aren't more teachers of color? Period. Black teachers, teachers of color. Why do you feel that there aren't more of them?
I honestly don't know. It just seems like I only see people of my skin tone, if they're in the school, they're a staff member. They're never a teacher, or maybe they're a substitute teacher, but they're usually doing something different that's not always just teaching in the classroom. So I'm not really sure why we don't have more teachers of color, but I guess it really just comes down to who is the principal or who is the district hiring to be in our school.
Very astute point. Who's the gatekeeper, in other words?
Yes, most definitely. I think it's important to have someone who looks like you in a learning environment. I feel that you cannot learn anything from someone who has never experienced anything the way that you have experienced. Especially around this time with it being Black History Month. I don't understand how we are supposed to celebrate our people and our skin through someone who doesn't look anything like us every day at school, and learn a new topic about someone from the past from someone who doesn't look like us or understand why Black History Month is such an important thing. And yeah, you have people who are like, oh, I support Black Lives Matter, and they can't support it, but you will still never understand why we support it the way that we do support it. The benefits of having a Black teacher, when you do have those very rare Black teachers, you can see that they know the issues that go on at home with students, and they understand to the extent, and they don't look at you as just some lost cause or just sad, or your parents just can't take care of you. They look at you as someone who have potential but don't have the steps to get there. And every Black teacher that I have encountered has done everything that they could to make sure that I was on the right path. And you do have some nice Caucasian teachers, but they just don't push you or give you the steps that they know that you need, like a teacher that would look like me would.
I feel like students of color might lose focus, or they might get disheartened by being pushed down, because someone can make you feel less than without necessarily saying like, oh, you're a bad student.
Very much.
Blah, 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 blah. So then it's kind of like, all right, well, I'm not going to put in as much effort. Don't put in as much effort. Fail the class. All right, got to retake it next year. Don't try at all. Stop showing up. Don't want to be there. Why would I show up? Then you get to the end, and then it's like, oh, you're not going to graduate. And you're like, why not? I felt not only I didn't see myself around in in the teachers, I didn't feel like, not respected, but I didn't feel like, I don't know, you just kind of felt disheartened, not feeling like you belonged there. That's what it was. Not feeling like you belonged there, not feeling like it was right for you, didn't feel encouraged by people around you. You felt kind of knocked down. So you're like, all right, maybe this isn't my thing.
Right.
And then you kind of just move off track.
Right.
And then you just kind of stop caring. That's kind of what I assume it's like. You're just like, this sucks, but like it sucks more to show up every day and get knocked down.
Right. I can feel the emotion in those interviews. We have many students, many Black students that feel that they are not a part of the classroom, that they are kind of on the outside looking in, and it's uncomfortable for them. For parents or people that are listening in, I assume it's similar to going to a job you don't like, going to a job where it feels like your work or the things that you're bringing to that job is not appreciated. So depending on what you had on the line and what your situation is, you may not want to go to that job anymore. You may quit that job because you feel that the environment is toxic, is not supportive, is not encouraging, is not helping you to grow. So you may remove yourself from that environment. In school, depending on kind of what's going on at home, some students may end up dropping out. But for some students, depending on their home situation, dropping out's not a choice. So they may have to endure that culture, that classroom, that environment for an entire year. So what effect does that have on your motivation to go to school, your motivation to achieve? How does that manifest itself in testing, standardized testing, forward exam testing? And be mindful that we've surveyed a small group of students, 25 to 26 students out of the district. I think it's safe to say that there are other students that feel just like these students feel. I think it'd be safe to say it's not just other Black students. Other students of color possibly feel what these students are feeling, as far as not feeling a part of the classroom, not feeling included. Almost like you're on the outside looking in, feeling that teachers don't understand you, don't get you, may not be empathetic to your home situation because they can't identify with it. So this is a problem district-wide, and not just the Madison School District, but districts all across America where this is the case, where there's not a whole lot of diversity when it comes to teachers and counselors and administrators. So it's something to be mindful of. This is just a few students. Like I said, I think it's safe to say that students of color in general are feeling these exact same emotions and are trying to figure out how to deal with it and how to navigate through it. Because for many of them, they don't have a choice. So we're going to take a quick break right now. We're going to return on the other side with more interviews from these students. You are listening to Pick Up the Mic podcast, and we'll be right back right after this. Welcome back to Pick Up the Mic podcast with your host, Corey Whitmore. This is episode 5, Black Teachers. Why are they so important? So we started with a few interviews from our students. We're going to continue with those interviews right here. And for those that didn't catch the first question, what I posed to these students, the question I posed to these students was, why is it important to have teachers that look like you? And here's what they had to say.
Super important. I in some cases, because some teachers really be on some other stuff. Like it don't matter what color. They just, they just are, whatever. But it's really important because I feel like we need somebody that we can relate to. We need somebody that knows the struggle and is like really passionate in helping another brother or sister out, and pushing them. Like, I feel like if we had a person that was our color pushing us, they could kind of maybe look up to the teacher like, dang, I could be like that teacher, or that teacher's really like inspiring me to be something because that teacher has gotten so far in their life. We need that extra support, and I feel like it would set a like great example for everybody. And that's why I also said it would be better if we had like more Black teachers, because it'd be more of a community than feeling like you have to be somebody else and like act this type of way or act white or act proper, whatever,
I will say, gosh, I'm 18 years old. I've never had a teacher of color before. Ever. Or no, I've had one Mexican teacher, but I've never had a Black teacher. So I think the thing is, kids, especially younger kids, respond to people who look like them, right? Like there's this whole thing about like representation and being seen that we see in like media. That also applies to learning, because as a young child, you're going to be more comfortable with people who look like you, who look like the people that you're around. You trust them more, especially if you don't trust certain types of people because of things that you see on the news. There's always going to be, especially in talking about racial issues, if it's a teacher of color, they're coming from a place of understanding versus a white teacher who's doing an excellent job. They never lived it. They can understand it. They can tell you about all of these experiences of people who have, but they don't have that experience themselves. And that's the part missing. Like when I TA for American history, and so the teacher was white, he's great. But one day I was a TA and he had a substitute who was Black. And you can see the change in the class because he's able to talk about his own personal experience, meaning like, when I was a kid growing up at Memorial, this was happening, versus the other one being like, when I was a kid growing up at Memorial, my friend. And so I think that's something that a lot of people don't notice.
I feel like you can just relate with them more. And if you have someone to relate to, you're going to be more open. And it's not like, I feel like if you don't relate to the person, you might say something, instead of like taking it in, they're judging you in a way. But if you lived through it, you're just going to be like, I know exactly what you're talking about. And also, I feel like the whole reason that there is barely any teachers of color, it's because we never saw people that look like us. Like when you see someone that looks like you want to be them. But if there's no one that looks like you, you're not gonna have an idea of what it's like to be in that position, and it's never gonna come across your mind that you could be that person. You could be a teacher, you could be a principal type thing. So yeah.
Well, I think the bottom line is that white people will never understand what it is that Black people go through. So having a white teacher teach you about what you're going through is like are you really going to want to listen to that person? They don't, like, if someone doesn't understand me, why am I going to want to listen to what they have to say to me, type of thing. So
yeah, I think it's extremely important to have more Black teachers, because I feel like when the teacher's Black, you already have that cultural connection and you already like relate. And like, I don't have to prove to you that I'm a smart Black kid. I just have to prove to you that I'm smart. And like, I have like staff in my school who are Black, and I have amazing relationships with them. It's like, I see them as like mothers and fathers. And like, I just think, imagine what that would be like as a teacher, like how beneficial that would be to me, and like how confident that would make me as a student. So yes, I think it's extremely important, and our school district needs to do a better job at finding Black teachers.
Extremely powerful interviews from the students once again. I'm so blown away by the students and their responses and their willingness to share their experiences. Their ability to really be able to analyze what is going on and happening during their school experience is incredible. But like I said, blown away. I don't have to prove to you that I'm a smart Black kid. I just have to prove to you that I'm smart. I'm going to leave you guys with that. We're going to go ahead and take a break. And we'll have more Pick Up the Mic podcast right after this. Welcome back to Pick Up the Mic podcast with your host, Corey Whitmore. This is episode 5, Black Teachers. Why are they so important? We're hoping we are giving you a full perspective on the importance of Black teachers, the impact, the effect on why we need to have them, why we need to be actively recruiting them, and how it can benefit everyone involved. Before we get into some of the interviews with our community leaders, I wanted to talk about quickly an article I read entitled "Want to Support Black Students? Invest in Black Teachers." This is an article that was in Time Magazine last year, August 11th, 2020, written by Erica and Michael Hines. And there's a few parts of that article I want to highlight for you that I found of interest, especially with the things that we have just heard from the students. This article goes to say that improving the prospects for Black youth in America's schools means developing and diversifying the teachers inside them. Kind of what we've been talking about, diversifying the district at every level, teachers, counselors, administrators, across the board. So the article goes on to say, Black teachers today are, by nearly every metric, more successful at supporting the achievement and well-being of Black children. Black students who have even one Black teacher during elementary school are more likely to graduate high school and consider college. Black students with Black teachers experience less exclusionary discipline and fewer office visits, a crucial break in that school-to-prison pipeline, a disturbing widespread trend in which school discipline interactions lead to interactions with the criminal justice system. The article goes on to say, and it is not only Black students who benefit from being taught by Black teachers. Research has shown that students of color believe students of the same race hold them to higher expectations and are more culturally sensitive than their white counterparts. These skills and mindsets are critical, especially now, as Black students face a new wave of trauma initiated by police violence against Black bodies, and schools grapple with the ways in which they often perpetuate racist systems. There's a lot in that article, but a lot of things that we've kind of been talking about and that we've been working ourselves through in this podcast. We talked and touched a little bit about in the last episode about students going to school in this now post-Trump era, the BLM era, the George Floyd era, the impact that has had on them, and the exposure now that they've had, because students nowadays all have that device, that mobile phone, all the things that they are seeing every day that they're being exposed to, and the impact that has had. I remember one of the students saying they've seen it so much they've become feel like they've become desensitized to it because they see it so often. That's that new wave of trauma, part of that new wave of trauma that this article talks about. But it points out that kind of what we've been saying from the beginning, that, you know, everybody benefits from a diverse school and a diverse district. Who can better tell this than than our community leaders that we have in this podcast, that are the teachers, the principals, administrators. Let's hear from them. And I think we're going to start with Mr. Shackelford, who's a teacher in the Madison Metropolitan School District. He phrases this in a way I can only hope to. But let's go ahead and listen to Mr. Shackelford and how he answers this question of why Black teachers are so important.
Yeah, I mean, see, and that question, when I get asked that, because I grew up in Gary, Indiana, so I got to see a lot of teachers that look like me. But then when you come to like Madison, it's like, whoa, what's going on? So yeah, just this, because it doesn't represent you. You feel like your culture's not even like, what's going on? So luckily, you've been in our school building.
Yep.
I'm the only Black student on staff of regular education, but we do have a Black counselor, Black vice principal, a few Black faces in the administration. But like I say, like a student can come to my class, but then when the rest of their classes, the rest of the day, they're not going to see another face that looks like them.
Right.
So that's very important for them, because it's like just representation and wanting to belong, and that thing like, hey, there's a lot of successful Black people walking around here. They're professional, they're doing things. I want to do that too. You know, it gives them something to aspire to. You know, you've been in our building.
Yep.
The welcoming classroom part. Now, you could be a white teacher and have a welcoming classroom, but you gotta start looking at these kids with empathy and reaching out to them and really looking at them as a human. Stop looking at them as something that's a statistic or is going to disrupt your class. You got to really start learning how to work with these kids, because you can be an ally. They would love your class just as much. For you've seen how I work. I have that, being a Black man, I could bring that to my classroom. But I also have more majority of white students than anything. So I'm never asked, like, how do you work with white students? I have to do it, you know, and you see the results, and I'm the same way. I don't change for them. You know, I bring my Black culture into the classroom. And I think that's what students, they want that feeling.
Right.
You know, I can relate to you when you saying to me as a young lady, can I keep my hood up? My hair is messed up, instead of trying to send them to the office. You see what I mean? Because I know what that means culturally to us, to young Black females, and about their hair. That's really important. So if anything, let's go talk to, when we have Ms. Johnson or somebody to go get you touched up. Let's go get you, I understand what that means, instead of looking at that as something that's interfering with my class. You see what I mean? Because I'm looking at the students' needs. I'm humanizing them. I have empathy. And that's what's lacking with, you say, that environment. Because these kids, like, they already coming in with this notion, oh, this white dude, he ain't gonna hear me. And then the first time they do something, you come with that straight discipline, that straight same thing that they see, because they might even test that to see how you're gonna react. And if they get that same reaction, then you might have lost them from the whole year from one encounter. So yeah, because you're not looking at them as a human or individual. You're just looking at them as, I have to make this student white like all the rest of the students. They have to act this way. They have to talk this way. They have to read these books. You know, if they don't, it's out of line. And you make the students feel like that, because you're showing that you don't appreciate anything about their culture.
The benefits are tremendous. And this is for all children of color as well as children of not of color. It's important for them to hear different perspectives. It's important for them to be able to see different folks in front of them and appreciate them and value what they're bringing to the table. But especially for children of color, I'll give you an example. You know, in my career as being a classroom teacher, I've had students that look like me, and they have said, even as young as first graders, just how excited they were. They can't necessarily name it, but there you can see the excitement that this person looks like me. I had students come from one of our local colleges that looked like some of our students and had a hijab on. And one of the young ladies was so excited, she was just jumping up and down that someone looks just like me. And she said from that point on, I'm going to college so I can have other friends that look like me. And so by them seeing that, they can see that they can achieve and they can be that. So by students being able to see educators, principals, superintendents that look like them, sound like them, they too know that they can also be that. If they see doctors and nurses, they too can see that they can be that, and that they don't have to just stay in one lane. Well, I can only be this or I can only be that. No, you can be whatever you want to be. And that's why it's so important for them to see that. And it's also important for all children to hear different perspectives. And so when we're talking about certain things, to be able to diversify the curriculum.
Thank you for that, Mr. Shackelford. And we just heard from Mrs. LaShawn Sells Whitmore on why it's important to have Black teachers in our schools and in our district, and the positive effect that they can have. Before we go to a break here, I wanted to reference another study that was done at the University of North Carolina. It was entitled, it was a part of the Carolina Education Review. It was the fall 2020 issue, and the researcher was Constance A. Lindsay. And basically, she had kind of done research on a number of school districts in North Carolina and Tennessee, specifically in schools where there wasn't a whole lot of diversity, but also in schools that had some Black teachers, whether it was, one Black teacher or a few Black teachers, and was measuring the impact that had on students that had that Black teacher, and what were their outcomes as they grew up and moved throughout the school system, as they moved through elementary into middle school and junior high and high school, and what were the outcomes. And here were some points from that research that was done that I wanted to share with you guys that I think that is important in what we're talking about. Here are some of the things that they, as a team of researchers, not just Constance, as a team of research, this is what they found. Black students and Black males in particular confront obstacles in schooling that create opportunity gaps that too often lead to lower educational attainment. Those quote unquote achievement gaps of shortened educational outcomes among minority students when compared to their white peers have been extensively documented. Now, a team of researchers, including Constance Lindsay, an assistant professor in educational leadership at the UNC School of Education, has found evidence that having a Black teacher has positive effects. Higher educational attainment and lower rates of discipline for Black students, with the strongest effect often among Black males from low-income households. They have found that having a Black teacher for 1 year in elementary school raised long-run educational attainment for Black male students, especially for those in lower-income households. For most disadvantaged males, Lindsay and the team estimated that exposure to a Black teacher in elementary school reduced high school dropout rates by 39% and raised college-going aspirations. A Black teacher for 1 year in elementary reduced high school dropout rates by 39%. Why would a district or a school system not do their best to try and pursue Black teachers and teachers of color? if there were studies and research that supports a reduction in dropout rates by nearly 40%. Now, I know this podcast is called Pick Up the Mic, but that feels more like a drop the mic moment. If I'm gonna be honest, that's incredible. That's an incredible finding by that team in North Carolina. It's another one of those moments, second moment in the podcast, gives you something to think about, doesn't it? It really does. And, you know, that should end any hesitancy as far as trying to go out here and actively recruit Black teachers and teachers of color. So like I said, it gives you something to think about. It definitely has given me something to think about as well. We are going to take a quick break here. On the other side of this, we are going to continue with a few more community interviews, and we are going to do our student shout-outs, where our students shout out a teacher, administrator, counselor, coach, someone that has had a positive impact on their development. We want to make sure that we give a platform for those that are doing the work and have inspired some of our youth. So Pick Up the Mic podcast will return right after this. Welcome back to Pick Up the Mic podcast with your host, Corey Whitmore. This is episode 5, Black Teachers. Why are they so important? So you've heard from 2 of our community leaders. I think another issue that also needs to be addressed when we are talking about hiring Black teachers and teachers of color is much like we've talked about with the students as far as their environment. We also need to take in consideration the environment in which teachers, counselors, and administrators may find themselves in. That environment may not always be welcoming, may not always be helpful in their growth as a teacher or as a counselor or as an administrator. And I think a question that needs to be addressed and that many schools and districts also need to address is, if we are able to find Black teachers or teachers of color, are we able to keep them? So many times for some districts, it may be a matter of retention, not recruitment. And I think those things go hand in hand, to find a Black teacher and bring them in, but they decide to only stay a year or two because the environment is toxic for them is not helpful either, and is not helpful to our students. So that was a question that I asked, especially of our community leaders, our administrators and our teachers, to say, hey, what needs to be done so that we can retain and keep some of these teachers? And we'll hear from Mr. Shackelford again and Dr. Rainey Briggs on that particular issue. And here's what they had to say.
You feel that the environment, some environments just may not support, Black teachers, counselors, Black administrators.
Yeah, I mean, that's like so on the nose right there, because that they have ran off a lot of educators of color from this school district for those things: lack of support, feeling like no voice is heard. Right. I mean, I've been bringing this up a lot because it's not like I want to throw it in the face of our school, but I'm not going to let us forget how I saw our staff act when we had 2 principals of color. They both left because they got tired of it. So it's like we really have to be intentional with the staff. Mm-hmm. Can you be led by a Black person?
Right.
Not that we got to start trying to get some fresh blood in here to change this dynamic. But like you said, how are we going to retain? What are we doing to show that we care about teachers of color? You know, when you might be the only one in the building.
Right.
You see what I mean? So, yeah, that's another thing that's another issue, right? And that's because I could even recall my first year. Luckily, our principal was Black, so he was real supportive. But I noticed from my staff, I'm just glad I was an older man coming into this, because I was like, man, if I was a younger person out of college, these people might have discouraged me to leaving this field, you know, because I felt no cultural relevance to me, you know, and it was just like, but I understand that. I'm grown. I know the workforce, but it was just so, at points, it was like I said, it wasn't that connection. Like you felt like somebody had your back, like you had somebody to go turn to. So I know Isaac was there, but like I said, me being an older person, I could deal with it, but I could see how some people, younger people, could get discouraged by like the older teachers, you know, the veterans who don't want to change their ways. So that's kind of still too that's helping some of these problems in Madison. Some of the teachers they think it's hogwash. They still want to teach like from the 70s and 80s. And that's what they're the ones running into all the problems. Right. So the only thing they could to deal with a student now is disciplinary actions. That's it. Right. It turns into this war of attrition, you know, through the whole school year.
And I'm going to tell you, like I've always said to people before we even get into how do we retain and how do we recruit, we have to educate. And when I say we have to educate, I mean we have to educate all of our white educators to help them understand why we need staff of color in these schools. Right? There's nothing worse. And I've been there because in many districts that I've been in, I've been one of the only Black leaders or educators. I've been in schools where I was the only Black educator in the school. Right? And if I could give you $100 or quarter or dime, whatever, for the number of times that I've heard that so-and-so got the job because they're Black. Oh, so-and-so got the job because they're Hispanic. Right? I think that's one of the most offensive things you can almost say to someone who is Black and brown and qualified on so many levels. To do the very job that anyone that's white is doing. So I think number one, we have to educate our white educators around why it's important to have staff of color. There's a study that's out there that shows that the more students of color that have, or any student, not just students of color, but students who have staff in the classroom that are Black or brown have a higher chance of graduating. So if you have one teacher, you have a higher chance. If you have two teachers, you have an even higher chance of graduating. So think about that. Like, wouldn't we all want to make sure, and I could be totally wrong, but I've seen this in many districts that I've done work in too. I've seen where everybody has a goal, and that goal is to increase graduation rates.
Correct.
And if we know right now that graduation rates rise, they rise when students have had 1, 2, 3, 4 or more staff of color, why wouldn't we be educating our staff on why it's important? That's a huge goal that districts have. There's nothing worse than having kids not graduate, go all the way through 4 years and not graduate from high school. Like, it's sad, right? So I would say, number one, we have to educate our white staff on why it's important to have staff of color. And I would say, what do we need to do to get more? Number one, educate those that are going to be working with them. But there's this diversity, belonging, and inclusion to me, which equals equity.
Okay.
Right? Diversity means who's at the table.
Right.
Right? Who's at the table? What are they allowed to do at that table? Right? Are we bringing the voices to the table that have not usually been at the table, or the most marginalized, families or educators that haven't had the opportunity to be at the table? Are we creating a sense of belonging for them? Are we having them feel like they belong here so that they can bring their voices to the table? Right? Diversity is we're having a potluck. Belonging is that you're bringing a dish to the table, and now you're explaining why that dish is so important to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And inclusion is making sure that we're sharing the dish and people are tasting, so to speak, your culture.
Right.
And understanding the importance of that.
Thank you to Mr. Shackelford and Dr. Rainey Briggs for that perspective. Dr. Rainey Briggs pointed out something very interesting about the educational piece may be the first place to start. Maybe the mistake has been made that, at least the mistake maybe that I am making, is assuming that administrators in these different districts know about this research as demonstrated by Dr. Rainey Briggs. And I'm sure if I would have specifically asked some of our other guests, they would have pointed you towards that same research to say, hey, there's a direct correlation between graduation outcomes and possibility for going on to college that is directly related to the experience of having a Black teacher, at least for 1 year. So Dr. Briggs may be correct in saying, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves depending on the district. Maybe the first place to start is education. Hopefully, once people see the benefit from having a Black teacher or teachers of color, then from there, we go to the recruitment. From there, we figure out the retention piece. And then we can look and evaluate that impact in the district and hopefully see how those graduation rates increase and become better for all students. Maybe that's the place to start. So I don't want to make any assumptions on any district as far as what they do know and what they do not know. But I will say that information is out there. It's a Google away. And I'm talking about first page. I'm not talking about Google, let me go and see if I can find it. Is it on the third page? I got to go to this link that connects to this link. No, if you put it in the search terms, you'll find results in more than one set of results on that first page. So if that's something that the district, for whatever reason, has not found time to investigate or discuss, then that's something they need to do. If they have, then they're at the point of recruitment, and need to figure out best practices as far as trying to bring in Black teachers and teachers of color into the district to teach. And once you have them there, be able to retain them. Much like Mr. Shackelford had said, hey, we had a few come through, couldn't keep them. 1 or 2 years, couldn't keep them. Environment's toxic. So you're kind of shooting yourselves in the foot when you spend all that time and make arrangements for someone to come into the district, but yet you can't keep them there for longer than a year or two. So we keep going around in this circle. So if the environment is not conducive to keeping teachers or administrators of color, then somebody at some point needs to make a change in that environment. Move around or let go of those who may not be able to work with teachers of color, Black teachers, or those who may not feel comfortable taking direction from an administrator of color or a Black administrator. If you have those entities as part of your school, as part of your district, then those need to be removed, or you will not be doing justice to the students of color, to the Black students that you have within the district. Something to think about, something to consider. Hopefully something, if that is the case, that's already happening. So I hope that you've learned some things, and for some people that may have kind of known a little bit of this, hopefully we've been able to widen your perspective on the need for Black teachers and the impact and effect that it can have on a school and on a school district. So yeah, something to think about. As we end every episode, we do our student shout out. Have our students shout out a teacher, a coach, counselor, administrator, someone that has had a positive impact on their development. And here we go, episode 5 for our student shout out.
So the first one I would say was my 4th grade teacher, Miss Langer. Because when I was in 4th grade, we used to have I remember we had DEAR, which is drop everything and read, but then we also had time where you're supposed to just you could write, or you could read, or you could draw, or you could just kind of relax.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember that I would write in this notebook, and initially it was just for our English stuff, right. But I would also write in it. And I remember her telling me oh, this is really good, and you have a story to tell, and people, you're wise beyond your years, and this will be something that people, can relate to, that they'll like. And I think she's so important because she helped to foster my love of writing, and I started writing again recently. And so yeah.
Okay. And is there a second person?
Yes. Which also I think most of the people in here would have an experience with him, hopefully, maybe, I'm not sure. But Mr. Zapia, he was my U.S. History 9 teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So he actually was not only my U.S. History 9 teacher, but also the first teacher I had my freshman year, in the day, the first person that would teach me.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, he's just, his passion for learning and his passion for what he does, reminds me to be passionate about the things that, it reminds me to continue to be passionate about the things that I'm passionate about, and not just settle for things that only make me sort of happy or not happy at all. So. Right.
A special shout out and thank you to Mrs. Langer and Mr. Zapia. And we appreciate everything that you have done and everything that you guys are continuing to do for the students. It's incredible work, amazing work. We just want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you so much. And this concludes episode 5, Black Teachers, Why Are They So Important? Hopefully we were able to answer that question for you and give you some things to think about. Make sure to check us out on social media at Pick Up the Mic Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. Post excerpts from the podcast. We like to put up some of the publications, some of the research that we reference in the podcast on those pages. So make sure to check those out. Other than that, thank you to the students. Thank you to our community leaders for giving us the insight. Thank you to the listeners, the people that are continuously tuning in. And hopefully you're enjoying this and gaining some insight about ways to address this opportunity gap, this achievement gap. So until next time, you guys have a good one. This is Pick Up the Mic Podcast with your host, Corey Whitmore, and we'll see you next week.